Guys, welcome back. So if you're new to my channel, you might think, hey, does this guy only go after the conservative news? Well, that's not the case. I'm an equal opportunity exposer. I do go after the left. I've torn TYT to pieces. Just a month ago, I was going after Chris Cuomo very, very hard. In my opinion, at least right now, the conservative side is a little quasi truth, whatever you want to call it. So they deserved more attention than the left. But either way, we need to expose everything. So this has to do with both of them. Now, NBC is doing a piece on the virus and conspiracy theories. Take a guess what they're going to cover. I'll go ahead and click play, but just start guessing what you think they're going to cover.
Result of the coronavirus pandemic. Conspiracy theories.
I don't even know if I really believe in it, to tell you the truth. I think there's something going on, but I don't think that all this illness is related to the virus.
So can you see that purple Q right behind her head? That's how this all works. They would never, ever do an NBC story about someone like myself or anyone who agrees with some of the stuff that we talk about. They would never, ever platform someone that exposes the charade that is the left-right. That's why I guarantee you this is going to be QAnon. This is going to be Plandemic. This is going to be maybe Dr. Batar and some other truther doctors. I've only seen up to this point, so you're watching this with me.
Talk with you today, sir.
When we come back, another result of the coronavirus pandemic. Conspiracy theories.
I don't even know if I really believe in it, to tell you the truth. I think there's something going on, but I don't think that all this illness is related to the virus.
The belief in conspiracies that has thrived along with the virus. That's next. Welcome back. Viruses breed more than disease. They breed belief in conspiracies as well. We saw that in the Open Up the Country protest this week across the country.
I don't believe that this was a health issue to begin with.
Anybody who has a decent thought process can see that there's more going on than the virus.
In the past 3 months, there's been a spike in belief in conspiracies, virtually all of them without factual basis, which makes them impossible to disprove. And that's the point. Joining me now is NBC News national security analyst Clint Watts, who specializes in tracking how conspiracies form and spread. He's a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Clint, it's good to see you. Good to see that you're safe. Let me start with this. You have a way of mapping these conspiracies out and how they catch on. And you describe it this way as how to build a disinformation bonfire. And in this case, like a bonfire, the first thing you need is a spark. And the spark being a theory is put online. In this case, why are these sparks so potent this time?
When we are scared, Chuck, in the time of a pandemic, when we're not really sure what to believe, we're fearful both for our life and our health and that of our families, we tend to take in information we might not otherwise consider. When you see these sparks thrown out there, there is a demand signal as well for it. People want to know, are they safe? Can I trust this information? And then people that have, different agendas, maybe it's anti-vax, maybe it is reopening the country, maybe it's a conspiracy by elites. If you throw all those sparks out there at the same time, it can start that fire of disinformation.
Clint, what's amazing about this spark, and we're trying to be careful here not to give more attention to it, but there's this book and this movie that circulated online, and while a bunch of tech companies got rid of it, the book itself is number one Amazon bestseller, number 3 New York Times. Both are putting it on the nonfiction category.
Chuck, this is a super organized effort. You've got multi-platform, multimedia. You've got people who know how to push this stuff in the social media environment. You have people that know how to make a very high production video that's very engaging. It makes you want to start to engage in these conspiracies. And then you've got all the so-called background. This is that book. This is many, many websites that are out there that are talking about health or health risk related to vaccines. When you put all of this together, it's hard not to encounter the information. And the more you see something, the
So right off the bat, we know what they're talking about. They're talking about Judy Milker-Tits and Dr. Bitar. We're talking about Plandemic. We're talking about Out of Shadows. And ironically, the NBC telecast guy, the anchor, said, we don't want to give them any more publicity. Yeah, they do. Yes, they do. This is what this is about. It's a controlled environment, and they're absolutely giving them publicity. They don't even have to say the name of it. They just said it's #1 bestseller. #1 bestseller. So they're setting up. Guys, this is no joke, in my opinion. These people on this show, this NBC show, this White House guy that's literally paid to chart graphs about conspiracy theories are just as dangerous as people like Dr. Bitar, Dr. Milker-Tits, the people that put together Plandemic, the people that put together Out of Shadows. They're all equal in my mind.
or health risk related to vaccines. When you put all of this together, it's hard not to encounter the information. And the more you see something, the more you'll tend to believe it. Or even if you know it's false, you'll start to consider it.
All right, let's go back to the bonfire. So the spark, this theory, this book, this movie, then you get the kindling. And that is, all of a sudden, you have a whole bunch of fringe groups pick up on the spark.
Chuck, what's amazing in this time of the pandemic is how many conspiracies, we were talking about 5G 3 weeks ago, we're talking about essentially an elite, organized, corrupt, big pharma vaccine conspiracy this time, is it touches on many audiences. That kindling is when many fringe or alternative media sites pick up and astroturf this content. They repeat it over and over and over again, and then try and amplify it in social media. That creates...
Obviously, what this is about is tech censorship. They're all doing their part in bringing in tech censorship, whether it be NBC, whether it be this White House hack, or the people from Plandemic and Out of Shadows, the people who are blaming, saying that the CIA controls Hollywood nonsense. All these people are trying to bring in more tech censorship.
This content. They repeat it over and over and over again, and then try and amplify it in social media. That creates that kindling, that starts that fire, which elevates it not only in social media, but up to the mainstream media, where people have to start to address.
And 4 years ago, this disinformation campaign started internationally, and then domestic actors picked it up. It appears this is just the opposite this time, right? We're doing this to ourselves, but the international folks are goosing it a little bit, aren't they?
Chuck, when I talked to you 3 years ago about disinformation coming from Russia, it was something that they had to push along. They had to pick and grab certain things in the U.S., but they also made their own conspiracies to push. That's no longer the case. Right now, whether it's Russia, Iran, China, or any other U.S. adversary, there's plenty of U.S.-made disinformation which they can pick and choose, amplify, and send back into the U.S. audience space, seeking to divide us, seeking to erode trust in institutions, seeking to erode trust in our healthcare system, which is something that's essential at this point.
And then, of course, that leads to number three in your disinformation bonfire ingredients here, the gasoline. Social media becomes the gasoline. And it's on social media, you say, that suddenly you get people who appear to be trusted verifiers like celebrities.
Chuck, if you can get your kindling to boil over into that bonfire sort of stage. What you see is a celebrity or an expert, even if they're refuting a conspiracy, can elevate it so that there are more eyeballs on it. If you get just a select group, maybe 3 to 5 social media influencers who have an outsized reach in terms of audience, they can bring these conspiracies up to a level that's almost unmanageable. You can't even put the fire out at that point.
All right, let's talk about 2 aspects of this, though, that are a challenge here. One is a lot of people are going to criticize us for covering this because they're going to argue that we're amplifying or bringing attention to these conspiracies. What do you say to that?
If you don't address a conspiracy and it continues, if there's no rebuttal, people tend to believe things that have no rebuttal. If you don't rebut it, then that conspiracy continues to spread. At the same point,
I'm just putting it out there. I will debate both of these guys together anytime, any place.
Actually go and challenge that conspiracy, sometimes it can draw more attention to it. It can draw more evaluation. It's a delicate balance in the media and with the social media companies about how to police this sorts of information. I think the key things to look at is where is this outlet? Who is producing this information? How are they making their money? Or is this for an ideological cause? And the second is the experts. Why are they experts in this field and should you trust them?
What do you do? What do you do if you're Amazon? This was self-published on Amazon. This is why it's, gotten now the imprimatur of saying it's a New York Times bestseller, which in and of itself gives it legitimacy.
What's remarkable is the problem that was Facebook, Twitter, YouTube trying to police what is disinformation or misinformation is now spread to products. In the health space, we have to determine how do we police this sort of information.
Clint Watts, this is a difficult subject, but we thought it was one that's more important to.
Yeah, speaking of difficult subject, now I'm put in a position that I have to defend people that I absolutely despise. Dr. Buttar, Milkatits, like Out of Shadows, and, I hate to keep repeating myself, but Plandemic. Like, even though that's garbage, just like NBC, just like Fox, CNN, all of it's garbage, but no one has any right to censor it, or like this White House hack just said, police it. Like, it's insane. But that's the point of all of this. That's why it's done. Why do you think they started out with some jackass holding up a Q sign behind the very first protester? You think that was by accident? You really think that was by accident? They were like, they picked that file photo, that file video. Sure. We'll close with this. Wrap up this story about conspiracy theories and misinformation and bonfires and gasoline and kindling and all the other stuff that the NBC anchor was talking about. Let's talk about the main anchor for NBC, none other than the esteemed Brian Williams. He's the Tom Brokaw or the Walter Cronkite of our time.
Compton, crazy motherfucker named Ice Cube from the gang called with attitudes. But when I'm called off, I done sawed off, squeeze the trigger, and bodies are hauled off when I'm in your neighborhood. You better duck, because Ice Cube is crazy as f***. As I leave, believe I'm stopping. But when I come back, boy, it comes straight out of Compton.
But that's not how I want to present Brian Williams. There's something else about Brian Williams you may know and you may not know. And ironically, I'm going to use a CNN clip from Helter Skelter, whatever the anchor from CNN is. But anyway, that's not important right now. Let's have CNN tell you about the esteemed, trustworthy Brian Williams, nightly anchor of NBC News.
Routine, yes.
The first report was broadcast just a week or so after the beginning of the Iraq War. In a segment for NBC's Dateline, Brian Williams recounted a harrowing incident under fire. The date, March 26, 2003.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
In his report, Williams says he was traveling with a group of 4 Army helicopters based in Kuwait large ones called Chinooks. They can carry troops and, in this case, equipment to build bridges in Iraq so motorized units could cross a river.
On the ground, we learned the Chinook ahead of us was almost blown out of the sky. That hole was made by a rocket-propelled grenade, or RPG.
After that attack, all 4 choppers landed, and a sandstorm grounded all of them for 3 days and 2 nights. The Army sent soldiers to guard the choppers as well as Williams and his team. In that initial report, he makes no further mention of the RPG attack, or that his helicopter took fire. He does say soldiers told him they spotted 4 Iraqis with what looked like an RPG during their first night in the desert.
What we didn't know was we were north of the invasion. We were the northernmost Americans in Iraq.
Fast forward 10 years.
Our good friend Brian Williams.
10 years later to the day, March 26, 2013. Brian Williams told that story to David Letterman, except this time saying he was on one of 2 Army choppers that were hit both by RPGs and small arms fire.
2 of our 4 helicopters were hit by ground fire, including the one I was in.
No kidding.
RPG and AK-47.
The question, of course, is what exactly happened in those 10 years to make Williams change his story? As with all war stories, it's complicated, and Williams' version slowly evolved. A few months after the helicopter incident, NBC News published this book, Operation Iraqi Freedom. In it, the account is vague. No mention of which helicopter was attacked or where exactly it took place. The story didn't really resurface until a few years later, when Williams returned to Iraq. In a blog post in 2007, Williams celebrated the life of Wayne Downing, a retired Army general who was an NBC News military analyst who was in the chopper with Williams that day in 2003. Williams referenced the Iraq incident again. Some men on the ground fired an RPG through the tail rotor of the chopper flying in front of ours, Williams wrote. There was small arms fire. A chopper pilot took a bullet through the earlobe. All 4 choppers dropped their heavy loads and landed quickly and hard on the desert floor. Williams' obituary for Downing began with the incident, and the obituary left the impression that Williams and the general were forced down by enemy fire.
When the Chinook helicopters we were traveling in at the start of the Iraq War were fired on and forced down for 3 days in a stretch of hostile desert.
In 2008, in a different blog post, Williams added a new detail. This time, all 4 choppers took fire. He wrote, all 4 of our low-flying Chinooks took fire. We were forced down and stayed down. Then, in 2013, to mark the 10th anniversary of the start of the Iraq War, Williams went on The Letterman Show. And he also talked with the actor Alec Baldwin about it for a radio podcast. Instead of just writing about it, now he was telling the story of bullets fired into his helicopter.
I've done some ridiculously stupid things, like being in a helicopter I had no business being in Iraq, with rounds coming into the airframe. But
Did you think you would die?
Briefly, sure.
And then this, just about 10 days ago, when Williams was at a New York Rangers hockey game and appeared with an Army Sergeant Major who was in Iraq and with the helicopter unit at the time. The soldier had helped protect Williams and his team. Now, a big change in the story. This is how he told it on NBC Nightly News.
The story actually started with a terrible moment a dozen years back during the invasion of Iraq, when the helicopter we were traveling in was forced down after being hit by an RPG.
The previous version had evolved to all 4 choppers being fired upon. This latest one added the RPG. Some soldiers who also were there began speaking out, saying on Facebook they had no memory of Williams being on the one chopper that did take a rocket-propelled grenade. And were all of the helicopters told to land because they had been fired upon? Or was it because of that sandstorm? Truth is a tricky thing in war. Now let's hear what actually happened on the helicopter that actually took RPG and small arms fire. Don.
Actually, Skelter is also a lying piece of garbage. Truth is not tricky in war. Truth is truth, and war is never, ever truthful. I'm old enough to remember every one of these networks lying through their teeth so that they get their maniacal, bloodthirsty Middle Eastern wars 15 years ago. I remember yellow cake lies about uranium in Niger. I remember those. I remember all the WMD lies. So nice try, Skelter. But In case you guys aren't aware, Brian Williams was suspended for 6 months for lying through his teeth about this. Typical news anchor, but I'm not done there.
He says he noticed Brian Williams inaccurately telling the story more than a decade ago and wrote to NBC about it. He also says he never heard anything back, and he's sharing his story for the first time on television this morning. Mr. Hellis, thank you for calling in from Enterprise, Alabama this morning.
Good morning, Brian.
Tell me, do you know where Brian Williams was at the moment that your helicopter was hit by the RPG?
Well, we had a lot going on, but I am pretty sure he was not in our flight at all.
Meaning he must have been so far away that he couldn't see the incident happen?
Yes, I mean, because, we had two units, each had a different mission. They're separated, by time. Their destination may be different from what our destination is. It can put time in between the two flights as they're heading up north.
NBC News has suspended its star anchor and face of American broadcast news, really, Brian Williams, for 6 months without pay after he admitted that a story he told about an experience he said he had during the Iraq War was not true. Kim Minji has more.
Brian Williams, a trusted newsman whose NBC Nightly News drew over 9 million viewers a night, is now suspended for 6 months without pay. This decision follows his voluntary step back from the news desk over the weekend. The president of NBC News, Deborah Turnus, said in an internal memo Tuesday that what Williams did was, quote, wrong and completely inappropriate for someone in his position.
And then, of course, we had the redemption tour with the classic interview with Matt Lauer. And in case you aren't aware of Matt Lauer, he was, attacking women in his office. But that's not for this story. We'll talk about that at a later date. But let's listen to why Brian lied.
What have these past 5 months been like for you? It has been torture. Looking back, it has been absolutely necessary.
In his first interview since being suspended as anchor of NBC Nightly News, Brian Williams told Matt Lauer on Today he's sorry. He didn't purposely mislead anyone, but
he's a news anchor. What? Of course he purposely misleads. That's literally the definition of a news anchor.
He knows now some of the stories he told were inaccurate.
Looking back, it had to have been ego that made me...
Okay, so excuse number one is ego. Did Brian Williams have any other excuses about why he lied?
He blamed it on a brain tumor. Shocking new details about how Brian Williams may have handled the fallout from his now infamous and inaccurate helicopter story.
I made a mistake in recalling the events of 12 years ago.
According to a new Vanity Fair expose, Williams could not admit he lied about coming under fire in Iraq. The magazine's source said he couldn't say the words, "I lied." He couldn't explain what had happened. He said, "Did something happen to my head? Maybe I had a brain tumor or something in my head." He just didn't know.
So that's right. He didn't have a doctor tell him he had a brain tumor. He just diagnosed himself. He must have had a brain tumor. Because otherwise, why would he tell something that's not true? Now, I could leave it there. Obviously, I've exposed this NBC story and showed the hypocrisy of them having the audacity to talk about misinformation. But I don't think it would be appropriate for me to leave it right there. As you noticed, I picked Brian Skelter of CNN to talk about Brian Williams lying about his time in the Iraq War. Has CNN always told the truth about their anchors being in Iraq? Let's see. This is CNN covering the very first Desert Storm War all the way back in 1991. On location, they were actually not in Iraq, but they were in Saudi Arabia.
A couple of explosions, what may have been an outgoing Patriot ground-to-air missile, some reported airbursts that may have been an intercept of an incoming Scud missile. We're really not sure. All we know is that the air raid sirens have gone off, and we've heard the outgoing roar of at least one Patriot missile. We've heard some sort of airburst. We can't tell where it was from where we are right now. We're waiting to see what's happening. As you can hear, the air raid sirens are still going off around us. People are, strangely enough, used to it. This is the first one of these attacks that's taken place early in the morning, but they're not showing you anything other than what we've got now. What did you see there? Is that a missile going out? No. We're not quite sure. We can't show you anything else than what we're seeing right now because of military regulations. We are not allowed to show you where the missiles might be going, what direction they might be flying in, where the airbursts might be taking place.
Okay, keep in mind, this was 1991. There's actually a movie about CNN and their origins and how during this time they were the first 24-hour news cycle. So before this had happened, all you had was your 5 o'clock and maybe your 10 o'clock news. But during the very first Gulf War, this is how CNN was born. So you have people from around the country watching this broadcast. There were no other networks to watch. They were watching this, scared for their life for this anchor. I mean, look at him. This guy is literally in the middle of a war zone.
There's something going on. We heard another dull roar that shook things a little bit, and we're waiting to see what else is going on. Right now, that's about all we know, that something is happening. We're hearing pops and things shaking, but people are staying relatively calm around here. People evacuated in an orderly way to the shelters, but apparently there is something going on. The Patriot missiles, we're assuming their Patriots have gone outbound, and we've heard some explosions, and that's about it for right now. We'll get back to you when we know something else. Something is happening here, and we're scanning the skies for something else coming in, but right now we can't see much of anything, and frankly, this is what we can show you on television right now because of military restrictions from both the Saudis and the...
Exactly. I mean, the military has very tight restrictions, especially back in 1991. The Saudi Arabian military and the American military are not going to let the cameras pan around. You could see a Scud missile coming in. There's no telling what you could see. Dead bodies. You could see the horror of all of it is so frightening.
CD, if you need to take cover, I notice that you've got your gas mask in your hands. If you need to put it on, please do so. If you need to take cover, please do so. If you are able to take a question, did you think that the possible threat would be over because it is now morning there? It's just after 6 o'clock in the morning?
The whole thing is everyone assumed that the threat would be over because it was early morning. But the thing about Saddam Hussein is that he has never done the expected. And right now we have, once again been surprised with the unexpected, an air raid, an apparent attack, although we can't say what the outgoing missiles hit at approximately 20 after 7 in the morning Saudi Arabian time. All the other attacks have occurred from 10 o'clock at night till 4 in the morning. This is the first one to take place in eastern Saudi Arabia during the daylight hours. The sound you hear behind me is the hotel. Richard Thicker. It's not the national by afternoon. So people are looking up in the sky, scanning the skies to see what they can see. Do we see much of anything out there? Can we see much of anything? Okay, well, apparently there was some word of outgoing. Again, we cannot be specific about the direction. All right, we are now led to understand that there are also firings in another city in Saudi Arabia. CNN's Carl Rochelle is here with me, just came up. Carl, I know we can't be very specific given these restrictions, but within those parameters, what did you see?
Well, what I saw, I didn't see anything hit. I looked almost straight above us. There is a vapor trail coming from my right to my left, and there's a cloud of something. It looks like it might have been an explosion, a cloud. I'd say it was...
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Oh dear Lord.
My apologies for he's putting on a gas mask. There hasn't been any gas dropped here that we could tell. You smell anything? No. You may smell some of the fumes from a missile exhaust going off. The missiles use a rocket, a cordite, some sort of burning. We just heard a little thump just then. But
I have to apologize for that. I caught a whiff of something and felt momentarily...
Oh, I know what the whiff is that you just smelled. Oh, I know what that smell is.